Okay, we are live. Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Coast EVs, your fortnightly fast charge on electric vehicles and infrastructure. You're getting a bonus edition this week because we had a special guest slot lined up and then messed up our schedule for earlier in May. So you get an extra weekly appearance of us here. But your quick reminder, you can catch the audio-only version of the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, everything else the day after, usually around lunchtime Eastern. And then obviously the YouTube version will replay, and about the same time tomorrow, Thursday, we'll get some timestamps up. So if you want to skip around different parts of the conversation, which I know will be an enlightening one, then those will be there for you. So this evening, unfortunately, Walter can't join us tonight, but we do have Mr. Eric Way over on the West Coast. So live at 5 for you, Eric. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. I just wanted to re-emphasize that we're just being extremely thoughtful and respectful of people's Memorial Day vacation plans.
That was all intentional. It's the best laid plans always seem to work out for us in the end. So let us know where you are, what you're up to, what you're driving down in the comments. We'll do the news first, but then we'll jump around and give an introduction to everyone else before we bring up our guest for a very interesting, enlightening conversation on level 2 charging. But in the news this week, I wanted to quickly call out in about probably 10 hours time, the Kia EV6 Preview will become a reality, and we will get into another edition of what is becoming not a groundswell of lots of EV compacts, but we have the Volvo EX30, we have the Chevy Bolt EV, which will eventually come back on an Ultium technology platform, and a few different versions here, even the Equinox EV getting down to that kind of $35,000 price point eventually. Eric, it's all kind of conjecture at the moment, and obviously we'll know more soon, but is the EV3 something you're looking at as a real contender for that kind of compact budget crown? You're a Bolt EV driver yourself, so you have a little skin in the game there.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not been fully on my radar yet, but it is now.
And I'm going to throw up some pictures here while we talk.
Yeah, because I have a lot of respect for Kia and what they've done, right? And so, I have some pretty high hopes of this. Now, is this supposed to be replacing the Niro EV, or is this supposed to be doing sort of what the Equinox is doing, where it's sort of sliding in between the actual compact or subcompact SUV and the slightly larger midsize? Because I'm not clear on where the EV3 will really fit in that lineup in terms of maybe replacing the Niro EV, because that will kind of determine what it's competing against, right? Is it competing against the Equinox, or is it competing against the Bolt EV? So,
right. Yeah. I mean, the Niro EV but it's got the same issue as the Hyundai Kona electric, right? They've had that kind of older, based on a combustion platform model that has fit into that kind of the most affordable version of the Hyundai and Kia lineups. But as you're right, as they come in, those would seem to be more fit for the hybrid, plug-in hybrid crowd, if they're going to go that way and lean into that. And then look at the EV3 as their base model, the entry point, because there are going to be some fairly significant limitations compared to like an EV6 or an EV9. It's not going to be on that 800 volt platform by the sound of it, so you're going to get a little slower charging. Size is obviously a question there. If we look at the interior here, we're looking quite sparse. I think that's becoming something we see quite often with the the Volvo EX30, obviously following in Tesla's lead of taking away some of the kind of creature comforts, making it a very minimalist interior. And then on the exterior, I think it's actually a little bit longer than the EX30 if it comes to pass, like a few inches. But it does fit in that kind of city urban runaround. If it's going to get probably in the realm of what the Bolt gets, around that 250, 260 mark. I don't know about you, but I found the Bolt to be an ideal kind of urban vehicle. It's just a perfect little car to maneuver around tight city streets, but I would see it fitting in that kind of slot.
Yeah, and I really do think that 200 to 300 mile range is the sweet spot for most drivers, right?
Mhm.
And then where Kia has really made a name for themselves, I was kind of surprised to hear you say that you didn't think it would be 800 volt, because Kia and Hyundai, sort of where they distinguish themselves is their how quickly their cars recharge, right? And so even at the time of the Kona Electric and the Nero EV early on, they were top of the pack for non-Tesla in terms of charging times. So I would expect something similar from the EV3. That's why I was kind of curious about where it's fitting in. If it's competing against the Equinox, I would expect it to still have maybe 150 plus kilowatt charging, maybe the potential for 0 or 10% to 80% in about 20 minutes or less. And that, because that's sort of the hallmark or expectation I think people have now of Kia and Hyundai when in terms of their offerings, is that not necessarily the best range, not necessarily the best efficiency, but you add that power back really quick, and that's kind of what I think they're kind of catering to. So
yeah, and I mean, obviously, if it's got the smaller pack, it's not going to need quite so much, because I think even the smaller pack versions, where it's 58 kilowatt hours on the EV6 or the Ioniq 5, both have slightly slower recharge time, or slower power, lower peak, right? But
yeah, I think about 170 is what I think people were telling me they were getting on that 50, 55-ish kilowatt hour packs.
Yeah, but even that, I mean, it's night and day compared to some of the other options around there. Right. So, and if you're charging in a city, then which we'll get onto later, you have probably a bit more to do around you than some of the places where you're in a Walmart parking lot, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
So yeah, I wanted to keep I did want to mention that because I think it's something that people have their eyes on. I think that's around 6 a.m. On the East Coast. So if you're really, really interested in the latest kind of compact EV crossover, then you can wake up if you're on the West Coast at 3 a.m. and watch all that. Otherwise, just tune in the day after and we'll have a few more details for you, hopefully. But let's jump through the comments quickly here to say hello to everybody. Ron B is tuning in and out, but he's over in San Jose. And can you pronounce that for me, Eric?
Atascadero.
Atascadero in his Porsche Taycan. So hopefully he'll be able to join for a good bunch of this. Andy Getch, hello from Fort Myers, Florida. Another Florida shout. Bill B in Tampa in his Q8 Audi e-tron Taycan. There's all kinds there. Lots of stuff there. There's
not just one.
Group House yet. Tom Palmer, hello from Sisters Place in Green Valley, Arizona. Can't stay long, but thank you very much for joining us. Appreciate it. EV car camping, Walter from Concord, North Carolina. Stuck on a work call. I hope we can give you some entertainment in between whatever you need to input into that call. Let's see. Brian Ribby over in Minnesota. Good evening. We have Bob over in Cleveland. I hope to get back there soon as it's nice and warm now and enjoy that north coast of the lake. And Tom says he drove his 2020 Bolt from San Diego to Green Valley. There you go. So we've already got viewer road trips connected, and this is the time to think about them right before Memorial Day, as you mentioned, Eric.
Yeah.
And hello to Leonard, who jumps right into the topics with, I wonder why some manufacturers stick with lower voltages, just a matter of cell arrangement to get higher voltage. What do you think, Eric? Do you want to...
I think it's like the old thing they say in high school history class. The answer is always money.
So. Got to cut those costs. I mean, that does come into the whole conversation about stuff like the EX30 and the EV3. I think will be a lot of here's where they cut costs. Was it an acceptable decision? But we won't stay too long on it because I'm very excited to bring up if he's good to go. You can give me a thumbs up. Okay, very good. Just welcome to Nathan King, co-founder and CEO of itselectric over in Brooklyn, New York, a little down the coast from me. Good evening, Nathan. How are you?
Hey, good evening. I'm just putting in that I drive a Hyundai Ioniq 2023 5. I think it's an SE.
Okay.
There we go.
We are very close. I'm a 22 Ioniq 5 limited, but it still doesn't have a wiper. So it's got a nice big moonroof and vision roof, but
I don't have that. Yeah,
you don't have that. Yeah, that's right. That's only the
No.
newest model year, right?
You know what does have a rear wiper though?
Bolt, and you don't even need it because you have that. Well, you have. Well, at least I had the rear vision camera. So Nathan is from It's Electric, as we say, down in Brooklyn, New York. One of the interesting parts of that is I used to live down there, and I think we have probably quite similar reasons for getting into electric vehicles, because when I lived down there, I didn't really need a vehicle either. But Nathan, could you tell us a little bit about kind of how, or your background first, and then how It's Electric came to be?
Yeah, happy to. I've been living in Brooklyn for a good 30 years. Actually, one of these people that didn't own a car for about 20 of those years while living here. You don't really need to, especially if you're young and fit. You just get on a bike and go somewhere. Of course, we've got great subways. But then the pandemic hit, and at the time had a 5-year-old daughter. Realized for lots of different reasons that we needed to get a car. And I'm very ecologically oriented. I try to get organic vegetables, and I compost. So of course I wanted to get an electric vehicle because I was very interested in reducing emissions, and for basically mostly interested in for the sustainability and the climate change sort of reasons that I got into it. And but I live in an apartment. I don't have a driveway or garage. And so I started looking around, well, where could I plug in and charge this vehicle? And at the time, and this hasn't really changed that much, the only place I would have been able to charge it is in a parking garage about a mile away from where I lived. So I would have had to drive to the parking garage, pay for the spot. Sometimes in these cases, the charging is free. Sometimes they charge you a flat $25 fee, no matter like what state of charge your battery's at. It was just like, well, this is crazy. I'm not going to walk an hour each way to where I park my car. And it just was out of the question. I filed that away for a couple of years. But just it bothered me that, why is it that somebody like me isn't able to get an EV? I'd be a great customer for an electric vehicle company. And then it just, one day I was looking out my window, and it just occurred to me, well, why can't I just put my own EV charger in front of my building and charge it there? And I thought, well, it'd be interesting too, because then maybe other people could use it, and maybe I could earn a little income on the side, from people using my charger. And that's sort of when the light bulb went off. And here I am, like 3 years later. That's the basic idea of what we're doing at It's Electric. We are bringing chargers to the curbside. And the twist on the model that we have, there's lots of different things to talk about here, but the fundamental thing that we're doing that's different for right-of-way charging, so for putting chargers out on sidewalks, is we're connecting with that private building, the adjacent building. So we find buildings that have spare electrical capacity. A lot of them do, most of them do. A level 2 charger is, a good, the 7.5 kilowatts, that's a 40 amp circuit. And we use that. It's different, I said, than the way it's being done today, which is for the most part, when you have a ton of EV charging in the EU and the UK, curbside EV charging in the EU and the UK. We don't have very much here in the US, but in both cases, it's all being done by a direct connection to the utility. So yeah, I'll talk a little bit too about my background too professionally too, and if you're interested, but
yeah,
just really but jump in and ask questions, please.
No, let me kind of just underscore your point here of my background here is in Paris trip I took last month, and then I was also in London a little bit before. You can see the Belieb, I guess you would pronounce them, but you kind of bring your own cable solution. They fit into the streets fairly close, and this one is in London, which is I believe part of a residential unit. But again, there's the kind of thing here is all being bringing your own cable. It's quite a common thing there to just have your own cord in the front or in the trunk, and you just pull that out. And that's kind of, to come on to your solution, what we're looking at with It's Electric. I think you have these just behind you here, if I pull this down, and you're obviously starting to get to a point where they're a little bit closer to being on our streets. We'll get onto the kind of timeline for the product later, but obviously I think you'll get onto this. You have a background in architecture and design. How did that lead into obviously needing to make the solution for what you want for your vehicle yourself? But how did you make that jump into that space?
Well, I think that sort of scenario that I described, where you look out in your window and you see a parking spot, and you wonder, on the city street, and you wonder, well, why can't I just put my own EV charger there? I think lots of people have that thought. But what's different for me was, I'm an architect. I've been working in the city for a couple of decades, and I understood right away what it would take to get a permit for that, to put that charger there. Like all of the different steps that you would have to take from the top down to get permission from the city to put the charger there. And for me, it was like, well, I get permits for everything I do. This is a problem that you can solve. It's not insurmountable. Everything that you see around you in a city has a permit associated with it. And that was one of the many things I did as an architect, was actually try to get those things through the approvals process. And when I looked out on the EV charging landscape, what I didn't really see was an EV charging company that was oriented around making deployments in cities, not in the US anyhow. And I would love to hear your feedback on why that is. I have my own thoughts about sort of where the EV charging industry sort of grew up. But here in the US, the concentration was, and still to a large extent is, focused on installing chargers on private lots and garages, and fast charging along highways. We don't really have a company, other than us and a couple of other startups, that are just exclusively focused on building out EV charging infrastructure in cities themselves. And I think it presents a unique set of problems. It's very different to put a charger on the sidewalk than it is to put it in, let's say, a Whole Foods parking lot or in a structured parking deck. And so bringing this sort of architectural thinking, my experience working in architecture and getting permits and thinking about urban design and urban planning, it led to a lot of the decisions that are sort of built into the DNA of itselectric. And the hardware reflects that. We believe here that cities and the people that live in cities don't want to see things on their city streets that look like gas pumps, or that are very large and take up extra space on the sidewalk. We just don't think that that will be sustainable over the long term when you think about the number of chargers that there are. And so this is a bring your own cable model. As you noted, this is kind of the predominant way that EV charging is done. Public EV charging is done in the EU and the UK. There's, I don't have great numbers for the continent, but in the city of London, we just learned that there are 22,000 curbside chargers just in the city of London themselves that utilize this curbside cable. And I can kind of show you. I have one here too. I've got this is a J1772. So on this side we've got the the regular J1772 port, and then on this side this is a what do we call this? This is a Type 1 connector or a many keys connector. I think in the EU everything is many keys to many keys or Type 1 to Type 1. So we have a slightly different flavor here. But our charger socket that we have back here is based on that same standard. So if the European companies were to deploy their chargers here in the States, we're all using the same cables. This is not like a proprietary standard. There are SAE definitions. So this is actually a J3068. So we're all using interoperable standards that have been adopted by the SAE. And then more recently, we can give drivers a Type 1 to Type 4 or J3400. And we have a bunch of our drivers using this now. And so one of the nice features, which I didn't really appreciate at the time when we designed this configuration, was the standard transition. I thought that it would just all be J1772 someday and that Tesla would switch over their cars. Instead, it went the opposite way. But For us, we don't have to worry about it. We don't have to make decisions about what connector we have on the end of our charger. We'll just give you the connector you need. You don't need an adapter. Your bring your own cable is just the right cable for your car, and we don't have to worry about it. There's more to say about the detachable cable and bring your own cord, but I'll just sort of pause there.
Yeah, we definitely need to get there. I think Eric has been chomping at the bit. I think as both of us living in, as I say, I lived in Brooklyn, so I had that kind of scene in my head as you kind of described it. And then I live now a little north of Boston, but I still have that same view of those same kind of row houses, beautiful, beautiful houses, but all very packed together, limited parking, all of that street dance with the curbside parking. So Eric, you in Los Angeles for a while, you're now a little more rural, so you see both sides of it. What springs to mind initially? What are you kind of wanting to get into?
So many things. But I mean, first of all, I just huge kudos, huge applause to you, because I've been in the same position, scratching my head for years about why we don't have a bring your own cable solution. In fact, I actually would prefer that even for DC fast charging. One of the biggest issues we've seen in recent times is vandalism based on copper theft, right? And now all of a sudden, if you have an actively used cable that connects your car directly to the power dispenser, and you can lock it to your car or whatever needs to happen for security purposes. Cars now have, 24/7 video surveillance, right? So it makes things, it reduces that option, or, that potential for vandalism too. And then of course it's your cable, right? So you're responsible for its upkeep and maintenance. And so, if you screw it up, you're not affecting the next person, right? So like there's a lot of benefits to this. And then of course, like you said, just making it look nicer. And I don't know if you and I are also on the same page on this, but I think part of the reason we had the monoliths early on is there was a sort of aspect of the EV movement that was like, pay attention to me, right? Like, look at me, I'm here. When if EVs are mainstream, nobody wants to look at you because they're there. They just want to know. It's like a water fountain or a trash can or a bench on the sidewalk. It's just one more fixture, right, of city life and a city layout. So I think all of this, you're speaking my language, Nathan, because I do appreciate it. I have some concerns, though, being in California, because they've passed some recent regulations in terms of requiring an interface if you want to sell power, right? There's all sorts of additional regulatory hurdles that California has put in place that would basically force a charger to look like what we just said. Right. It's got to be a giant ATM on the side of the sidewalk in order for it to pass those legal requirements, which is unfortunate, because I feel like you're moving in the right direction, which is an opposite direction to that, which is just plug and play, like very streamlined, very focused on the aesthetics and architecture of a city. And I do have some questions about that in terms of plans to maybe integrate with those other features that I mentioned, right? Whether you're talking about doing additional landscaping on the sidewalks. I don't want to get into the political hurdle of benches that are not meant for people who lack housing, but I know there's been some pushback in some cities about putting benches out that are usable by the public. But just pairing these charging dispensers, right, with other features that would go typically on a sidewalk, I think that's also a big benefit too, because it just more and more, it just folds it into our everyday life of, I drive an EV, I don't have to worry about it. I park on the street wherever I feel like I need to park. I plug in, like you said, someone in the building associated is getting a cut of this, right? We're feeding revenue into this community. But it doesn't matter to me, because I'm getting to fuel my car, completely transparent situation, as I roam around a scenic, historic downtown, shop at local buildings, bolster the local economy, build up small businesses. Like, it seems to me like a win-win-win-win-win all across the board. So, yeah. Now I'm going to shut up.
Well, I think it's worth taking that, because obviously California is its own little market, or very big market, as we know, but you have your own stipulations there. Nathan, could you tell us, maybe set the scene for where you are right now, what markets you're looking at initially, and then maybe move on to Eric's point about how California is kind of the big, you need the place you need to crack, but also probably brings its own challenges.
Yes. So, yeah, the California stuff is interesting. We are paying attention to that. We think for the most part, we do have some modifications that will have to make that are fairly easy for us to do to accommodate the CFC readers, so the card readers.
Yeah.
But otherwise, like, as far as I have been able to diligence, we've got a fully ready to go product in California. The big displays that you see on some chargers for level 2, there are certain things that you do need to display. But as far as I understand it doesn't have to be on an electric display. You can post, so things like pricing and the capacity, those can be just done with regular signage. And, to the extent that a level 2 charging company, we can have fairly standardized rates where we don't need to worry about, constantly changing the price points. So we're very excited to be looking at California. There will be some news around that coming out. You're finding us actually at a moment where we have a bit of a backlog of things that we're ready to sort of announce. We had some big announcements earlier this year. I would say, enough exciting stuff to kind of keep us going through the summer, but look out in June and July for another round of sort of partnerships and other deployments in different markets. So that should be coming soon. At the moment, I'll just sort of tell you, we're about 2.5 years old total. It'll be 3 years in July that I left my last job to try to spin the company up. So, sort of officially, we didn't really put the needle to the record until the end of 2021. So in that 2.5 years, we built a few rounds of prototypes, and we got a fully market-ready product out there. So this is a UL certified charger. We're wrapping up a couple of other certifications that we need for some of the funding. And you can see we've got a few of them back here in some boxes. We just completed our first production run of 75 units, and we're shipping them to the different markets that we're going into. The one of the rounds of prototypes that we built last year was actually sponsored by the deployment where we installed it, was actually sponsored by Hyundai. So we had Hyundai as a partner for us. That was a 6-charger deployment that we did at 2 different locations here in Brooklyn. We've since come back and upgraded those chargers to the market-ready version. And so here in Brooklyn, we have some chargers actually earning revenue for us. We have a 4th charger that we installed in Detroit. It's more of a demonstration charger, so it's not really available to the public. But very soon, we're going to have additional chargers being installed. So we're looking to get 25 in the ground by the summer. We made our shipment there earlier this month. And right now, we're just sort of working our way through that sort of permit process that I mentioned before. But it's a kind of a first of its kind thing. And so every city it's going to take a little bit of doing to get that first round going. But we're moving through the process now, and I hope we can have these first chargers out and deployed as being one of those announcements that we have coming in the summer.
Excellent. Sounds like you'll be very busy.
Yeah. I think the other exciting thing that I'll just throw out there is that we also won a federal grant through the infrastructure law. So I'm sure you all know about the NEVI funding and the alternative fuel corridors. There was a different bucket of money outside of that NEVI alternative fuel corridors, which was what do they call it? The CFI, the CFI funding. And then with that, there was a discretionary grant program that we won that was called Ride and Drive. And so it's a $1.5 million award. It's for 60 chargers in 4 different markets. One of them is Los Angeles. So the others are another round of chargers in Detroit, Alexandria, and Jersey City. And so that project's going to kick off once we get through contracting with Department of Energy, and hopefully seeing some chargers in the ground towards the end of this year or early next year. That project's very exciting because part of the deliverables, if you will, is to actually study the economic impacts and the permitting process of deploying chargers in the cities that we're working with. So a lot of the statements that we make about the importance of getting EV charging in cities, we're going to actually test our own hypotheses. So we have a third-party consultant that's working with us, that's doing measuring and verification. And so we're just really excited about that as well, because we're pretty confident that we're going to show some clear benefits to the communities where we deploy.
These installations, as far as I recall, I mean, you're putting these things in within a couple of days, right? If everything goes to plan, you're not taking weeks and months to get the charger in the ground, and then because this is all hooked into the existing infrastructure, and mainly it's just getting that post in the on the sidewalk or wherever it's going to be positioned. Is that there is just a 48-hour process in good times?
Yeah, I mean, the rough order of magnitude is the first day the electrician comes in, they cut the trench and they lay down the sidewalk. They lay down the conduit. The second day they come back, repair the sidewalk, make the final connections, and commission the charger. It really isn't that difficult. Some days, in some locations maybe that are a little bit more complicated, it'll take a third day to kind of get it all done. But it is pretty similar. I know we're working with sidewalks, which can be sort of more complicated, but it isn't that much different than an electrician coming to your house and putting a level 2 charger in your driveway or garage. It goes pretty quickly. And these are just level 2 chargers. We built a nice stainless steel body around them, and there's the card reader, but they're not really, I'm very proud of getting the charger to market, but level 2 chargers aren't really that complicated. They're faucets, they turn on and off. They get us, the signal from the car to start the battery and to turn it off. It's not really too complicated. So just the installation process doesn't really require that much special knowledge from the electrician. And we don't really have to do anything to the site that's special to hook up the charger.
Yeah, I had a couple of questions with that, though, in terms of getting the power, right? And one of them is related to the new standard, right? The SAE J3400, because it does actually allow for that 277 volt hookup. But the problem is not all EVs can take it, right? So there's still a little bit of a rough patch within the EV community. But I mean, I'm sure that automakers, as they transition to the new standard, are going to ensure that their onboard chargers are, that 300 volt, capable input, right? But in terms of that, because I know that actually opens up additional options for running power, because you can run a lot more power to a 277 volt system just off of a 480 volt, drop than you can, right, running through a regular 240 volt circuit. So like that's on the commercial side, but then running power too, it sounds like you're primarily focused right now on maybe commercial or industrial buildings, or like property managed buildings, retail spaces maybe. Are you considering also opening this up to potentially private homeowners, right? Because we do have still a good number of older neighborhoods in America where there are single family homes, where there's no off-street parking, or maybe there is off-street parking, but there's also an additional need for on-street parking. Are you thinking of opening that up as an option for those maybe residential areas where individuals can participate in your network as well, like private homeowners?
Well, I'm glad you asked the question, because I think actually this is one of the threads that we can pull, which is actually opens up a lot of different avenues for discussion. And without walking it too far back, first I just want to talk about level 2 charging in this country, generally speaking. The big level 2 charging companies that we have in North America they're OEMs. They're building the charger and they're selling it to you. And for the most part, this works just fine, right? This is I'm a private property owner. I want an EV charger. I'm going to buy it from an OEM, and I'll be responsible for maintaining it. It's just I understand that I have to provide this as an amenity. Maybe I can make a little bit of revenue from it, but probably I'm not, because it's expensive to put the charger in. What we are doing differently is we're setting ourselves up to be a charge point operator. So we don't actually want to sell our charger to you. We want to put it in the ground, and then we want to operate and maintain it. And I don't think that the OEM model, the selling a charger to a municipality or to a civic utility, I don't think that's going to be sustainable in the long term. And I have a lot of people that agree with me in this. Like, it is difficult for the city to be the entity that maintains an EV charging. Cities and utilities don't want to be they don't want to be EV charging networks. And similarly, private property owners will get to a point where they too don't want to deal with maintaining the charger, dealing with customer payment requests, what to do if the charger is iced out, if it's in a garage, what to do if the charger breaks, who's paying for it, how long does it take. So what we've decided is the right way to do things is to be the CPO. We want to put the charger in, and we're responsible for it. We're going to make revenue from the charger over the life of the time that it's there, but we're not going to sell it to you. So we come to the city, we come to the homeowner and say, we're going to install this, including the charging hardware, including the installation cost, for free. You as the homeowner aren't going to pay anything. We have a sub-meter in the charger, so we know how much power we're pulling, and so we're able to give that back to the property owner. And the reason why this model works for us is because Curbside has a tremendous amount of utilization potential. So if you're putting an EV charger in a structured parking garage at a university or in a supermarket, you may get some of that opportunity charging, but it's only happening during certain hours. When you have the charger on the curbside, you can have literally anybody parked at that spot and using it 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And a lot of that charging is going to happen overnight. So people are going to plug their car in when their battery is fairly low, and they're going to go to bed, and they're going to come back and their battery is going to be full. And that high utilization potential that you see at the curbside is unique to this market. And I think one of the reasons that I sort of decided to pursue this is because this opportunity around curbside, I think at the moment seems very niche. When we talk to people here in the US, they're like, oh, that's interesting. You want to put a charger on the curb. But actually there are about 25% of drivers in this country rely on street parking. They don't have access to an off-street parking space. So that's 25% of the, I forget exactly how many cars are in the US, but it's about 70 million vehicles total. And those 70 million vehicles in the US collectively spend $150 billion on gasoline every year. So that is the market that we can capture. Because if there is a charger on your block, why wouldn't you use it? You're not going to go drive to a fast charger and sit there for 40 minutes and charge up. You'll just plug it in and go to bed. And that's sort of what we're thinking about, the way of doing it. It's high utilization, low installation, and earning money from revenues as a charge point operator. So in that way, Eric, to go back all the way to the first question which you asked, which was like, why aren't you thinking about the residential market? Actually, that's what we are doing. We're going to target residential areas in urban residential areas. We're actually less interested in those sort of commercial or off-street deployments. We want to be on a side street, let's say, not where the parking is already being metered, where you have like a 2-hour limit or something like that. We want to be somewhere where the drivers that park on that street have permission to do so. Whether it's free parking like it is here in New York, 97% of the parking spaces in New York are not metered, or whether it's a place like San Francisco or Boston that has the residential parking permit.
Yeah. It's interesting because it's not like there aren't solutions out there, right? I mean, you kind of touched upon how it's been a very niche market, and I think that that does describe it well. Although, you know, if we look at New York City, we've got the Flow curbside charging project there, which I think just reached 100 different chargers. I've got a quick image that accidentally flashed up of one of those.
Yeah.
That's much more of a standard kind of, you know, as you said, it's in the curb, it's dangling, it's attached cables all across, and that's fairly standard deployment. But we know that those have been used. I think the latest figures for 2024 were something like a 70% utilization rate, and not an insignificant amount of icing in some of that. So there's, you know, between them being blocked and actually being used, these are regularly, you know, in those most popular areas, really are being used. There's clearly a demand for it. I think we can see why that would be the case. Up here in a place called Melrose, just a little bit north of Boston, we've got these, which are the kind of similar idea, but, you know, a little bit further. It's mounted on the utility pole. And then this is my Ioniq 5 and the Tesla in front of me using those two. Again, this is kind of a, you know, it's out of the way, but again, you have that cable issue where they're kind of always there potentially. They do retract back up into the unit, so that's a slightly neater solution maybe. But again, those are a pilot of maybe, I think they did 12, 13 chargers there, and they've been replicated, I think, in Seattle, a little bit in Los Angeles, if I recall. And again, it's just it's things where the technology has started to have pilots, but hasn't gone a little further. Maybe we could talk a little about why we think that's the case. Has it just been too early days? Are people waiting to see these things in the ground before they buy an EV, or, you know, just we've got to prove out the ground before we have these things getting in there, and people are going to spend money up front on them?
Yeah, and I can sort of answer that question. And actually, I see Jed had a question about, you know, why is it so difficult to get curbside in? Think of, you know, you have two different kinds of permits on that installation that you have there in Melrose. One is with the city itself, which has to turn over the parking spot to be EV charging only. I think there's signage in the Melrose pilot where you're required to be plugged into the charger, or you're required to be EV parking only. So you need to seek permission from the city to do that. And then this other permit process is through the utility itself. So that charger that's mounted on that pole requires an interconnection agreement with the utility. I'm not sure if it's EverSource up there or if it's someone else, but
this one was National Grid, but yeah, same.
Yeah, okay.
They're both up here, but National Grid was doing the pilot. And
the chargers that you featured in that photo in New York City, those are also connected directly to Con Ed here in New York City. And there's actually in Los Angeles, there's over 500 curbside chargers that look similar. They're the same company, Flow. They're a Canadian company. They have about 500 of those chargers as well. All of these are connected directly to the utility. And so it's one thing, I think, to get a permit for a piece of street furniture that the city is approving. It's another thing to go and then get permission from the utility, not just to tap into the feed, but actually upgrade it so you're getting a level 2 charger. For the most part, what they call the accessory utility feed here in the U.S. is a 120 volt or a 110 volt feed. So your parking meters and your street lights and everything like that, that's all 120 volt. So if you want to get a level 2 charger, and you actually have to go back out to the main conduit in the roadway. And that's just very complicated. My experience as an architect sort of taught me this. It was one thing to get the permit from the Department of Buildings. It was something else to get it from the utility. And, you know, utilities are not the enemy. You know, like, they are working hard to bring power, and it's really challenging what they do. But they do not want to have to do, you know, thousands of interconnection agreements for curbside level 2 chargers in this country. And that's what they're looking at right now. So one of the things that itselectric is sort of proposing here is, well, let's skip the interconnection process. Just pretend that we're putting a level 2 charger in someone's private garage. And then when utilities look at it that way, they're like, oh, that's great. The meter's spinning fast. We're earning revenue. And we didn't have to do an interconnection agreement. And we're not operating and maintaining this asset, which is a big pain. As I can tell you, you know, like, you have a piece of equipment out there, stuff happens to it. So that's sort of maybe getting at answering some of the questions. And now I kind of forgot what your original question was.
No,
but,
it was, yeah, I think you actually did me a solid there and went into the comments, which is exactly where I want to go next. But
oh,
yeah,
sorry.
no, that was excellent. That was exactly where I wanted to be. So we will dive in, make sure we don't miss anybody's points. So Bob had just a comment on, would love to see that in Cleveland. His council person is an EV owner and may be helpful in moving this idea forward. Yeah, I think the value of having EV drivers, or at least people who have an understanding and a desire to get into an electric vehicle on your team for those, whether it's permitting or just proposals that people want to get these things installed, must be a pretty big piece. I don't know if there's any strategies that you've come up with, or kind of the key stakeholders that you would identify as people who've helped you move these projects forward in Michigan and Brooklyn. But obviously, I think Hyundai has been a part of your initial kind of funding, right? And you have the connections over in Michigan. But anyone you'd want to call out there as being a particularly influential help in getting itselectric in the ground?
So yeah, there's a lot to say there as well. It's one thing I just put the wait list in the chat. So we have it's not loading. We have a wait list on our website, so itselectric.us. And the thing I was going to point out, instead of just shamelessly plugging the wait list, was a good proportion of the drivers that sign up to be host properties are also EV owners. So you'll see on our wait list that we have a question that says, do you also drive an EV? And I think a lot of the interest that we have, people who don't have cars, we do talk to people who don't have cars at all, let alone EVs. But they have interest in earning that sort of passive income that we're sort of offering. But then we do have a lot of drivers like me. I have a building, I have power. I also want an EV. This doesn't need to be my own personal EV charger, that I use, but I can share it with others and get that revenue opportunity. So the city council member in Cleveland that is an EV driver, that's definitely a good place for us to start. Actually, in Detroit, all of the city council members were given, I think they're Wrangler 4xEs. So they're plug-in hybrids, but the city thought it would be a good idea to get the city council members a taste of what it's like to actually own an EV and keep that battery charged. But also be given the hybrid option so that they didn't have to completely rely on EV charging in Detroit.
Which, especially when they only have 20 miles of range, they'll be charging all the time for you.
So. Yeah, well, exactly. So, and I talk about Detroit, I talk about Michigan a lot. It isn't really an accident that Detroit is our first pilot community. I have a lot to say about Detroit. I had never been there until I'd started the company, but it's become like one of my favorite places. It's really it's remarkable. You can see the history of of the city in a really it's such a dramatic way, where you see all of this incredible like Art Deco architecture. You see the kind of incredible growth that Detroit had, but then you have all of these vacant lots. But lately, you're seeing new construction everywhere. Detroit is really coming roaring back, and I think part of that is they've really created an environment of innovation, especially around transportation and mobility. So New Lab, where I'm sitting in, I don't know, we talked about it before the show, but this is a sort of an innovation hub here in Brooklyn. They just opened up a branch in Detroit next to Michigan Central, which is having its grand opening, I believe, in this week. Michigan Central was this old, kind of like Grand Central Station here in New York, but they've just renovated it. It was sort of sponsored by Ford and some of the other companies. It's a really big moment for Detroit, and it's really fueling a lot of interest. And Detroit has done, in addition to sort of supporting our curbside charging pilot, they have the country's first public wireless roadway. I think the name of the company is Electrion. Don't quote me on that, but it's one of these roadways where you drive over it and it will do inductive charging on your battery. And they have facilities there. I'll give a shout out to the Detroit Smart Parking Lab, which was the first place we demonstrated our prototype. So we have like the physical space that the city and different stakeholders are allowing you to do, but then at the state level, we received grants for our deployments. And so we got a little bit of financial incentive to get there as well. And it was all like as a piece, like we came to it at the right time. But I hope that we're kind of an example of what Detroit was sort of hoping to achieve.
I think it's an interesting sidebar. I mean, we probably won't go too far down there, but on the last episode last week, we were talking about, how electrification is stoking American innovation. It's a challenge put up there, and often the naysayers the argument that comes back is we can't do it. We don't have the power. We can't, compete with China on costs. There's all kinds of areas of outing American companies and the entrepreneurs that are kind of driving them. I think even outside of California, which is typically seen as kind of the hub of the innovation in the EV space, like as you say, there's a lot going on in the Midwest. In that entire what used to be called the Rust Belt is seeing all kinds of regeneration. Wireless charging road, there's another one just down the road at Purdue University in Indiana. I think they were producing another pilot there. And this is kind of something that I look to stories like yours and the different spaces that people are jumping into, and see a lot of smart people working on the solutions that we need to be able to charge EVs, in the places we want to charge them. So it's kind of it bats a lot of that back for me. It has that element of there's a lot of people, good people working on effective American solutions that'll be able to potentially turn this into the next thing that catalyzes the next wave of EV adoption. Let me jump to the comments quickly. Hold that thought, Eric, just so I get AB's points in here. I think we addressed this a little bit, but for overnight level 2 to be attractive, the rules have to allow plugging in for more than a few hours after charging completes. Nobody wants to wake up at 3 a.m. to move their car. That is presumably something you can work in with PowerFlow, and obviously the cars can say how long they want to charge and manage that PowerFlow a little bit. Is that something that you're looking at as potentially being a CPO? Is that further down the roadmap perhaps, or what can you say about someone not having to run out in the middle of the night to fix their charging situation?
We don't want people to run out in the middle of the night to stop their charging situation, and the way that I think is probably the best of all possibilities is how New York City is doing their curbside pilot now, where they charge a daytime rate and a nighttime rate. You still get the same amount of power transferred, but you're paying $1 an hour overnight, and you're paying $2.50 during the day. And I think that's how we generally think about it. The $1 an hour is a metered, it's time-based charging, right? So you could plug into one of the curbside chargers with 100% battery, and you're still going to pay $1 an hour. So it's regardless of your state of charge, you're paying $1 an hour to be plugged into that charger. And what it means though is if you plug your car in at 8 p.m. and you wake up at 8 a.m., you've only paid $12 to charge your battery. That 12 hours, I think, will get my Ionic all the way up at a 6 kilowatt charger if I'm down around 20%. That's not bad, $12 to fill your battery. Now, what will happen is people will come in and charge during the day and pay the slightly higher rate, or they'll just, leave it there and they don't mind paying a little bit extra because it's still going to be less expensive than, going to a DC fast charger and paying 60 cents a kilowatt hour. Mm-hmm. So that's the way that the drivers are both motivated to use charging at the right time when the grid can handle it, but also to not use the charger unless they really need to, because again, we want to be in neighborhoods where people are either parking for free because they live there and they have a parking permit, or it's a place like New York City where nobody pays for parking really. You're just finding a spot on the street and using it there. So it's a different way than charging per kilowatt hour and then like putting in an idling fee. And it's also like, well, if somebody's motivated enough, and they can clear that spot out at 6 a.m, someone else will come along and they'll be able to use it. So I like that model, but I don't think it precludes other ways of doing it. The other problem with the cost per kilowatt hour, especially for level 2 chargers, is Tesla, it's very easy to find out how you can throttle down the charge rate. And so for curbside charging, where we really want to see that turnover, we don't want people to throttle their charge rate. We want it to be up at 32 amps Otherwise, people will just say, "Oh, this is if I I can just be parked here for a very long time and pay very little to be parked here in this convenient parking spot." So the time-based rates for level 2 in a highly competitive parking environment make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, and to that though, I was actually going to ask you about pricing, right, and what it was based on. And historically, unfortunately or fortunately, depends on where you sit on the aisle for that. California is one of those states that have prohibited time-based charging, so it has to be per kilowatt hour. And part of the reason for that was, it was seen as being punitive for certain EV owners, right? So it would be like one of the charging providers would be charging $1 an hour, and a Nissan Leaf with a 3.6 kilowatt onboard charger would be charged the same amount of money as a Tesla Model S owner, and they would be literally getting half or less power as a result, or half or less energy. So there was a movement within like California now that specifically prohibits that. Now, to your point, there are still ways around that, right? Like you're charging a connection fee, you're charging a parking fee, however that meters out. But that, and I think you're providing a low enough power now that's probably not going to be the same level of pushback, because everybody's car basically at this point can accept 6 kilowatt, 7 kilowatt or faster. But I mean, it is something that I think it's interesting to pay attention to. But for your overall pricing model, what I was curious about is just how you're basing it. Is it relative to local energy costs, right? So like we had mentioned, in California, maybe at home, you could be paying 20 cents, sometimes 30 cents a kilowatt hour for home rates, but you could be paying 50 to 60 cents per kilowatt hour for public DC fast charging rates. So in terms of being price competitive, but also just not selling yourself short based on local utility costs, right? Like how are you modeling that pricing?
It works pretty similar to other charging companies out there, where we're taking that base utility rate and putting a premium on it. And sort of what that premium is and how we're able to find the different charging rates, it's definitely going to vary from market to market. Some places will have higher overhead. We're trying to pay back our own installation, our own CapEx. And so, if labor costs or material costs are higher in one market, it might have a slightly higher add than another. But generally speaking, it's looking at that base rate. And then, what we also think, well, what are people actually paying for DC fast charging? And how can we structure the pricing so we're making sure that people are paying less than DC? The cheapest way to charge your car is to have a driveway and plug it into your own power, right? No doubt about it. I cannot invent a business model where I can offer public charging to people where I'm giving them the same cost for charging as somebody who has a off-street parking space. People who don't have their own driveway or garage, for better or worse, they're going to have to pay more for that public charging. Now, they don't have to pay for the charging equipment themselves. So, there's a little bit of payback, but I think over time, if you have your choice, you're going to want to charge in your driveway if you have it. Mm-hmm. So we think that we can get the unit cost down much lower than what the DC fast charger companies are paying, because it costs us about 10% of the cost to put a level 2 charger in, on average, let's say, as a DC fast charger. Right. And so because we have much less CapEx to pay back, we can tolerate a lower cost per kilowatt hour, but then there's all this incredible utilization potential. And so we can sort of see we can still sort of pass on the same amount of kilowatt hours as a DC fast charger that has, a fairly average utilization rate, with our higher utilization rate and then our lower CapEx. So that's kind of the math that we kind of spool out.
So, and you could just say if you're not at liberty to share, but like what kind of ROI are you targeting or hoping to achieve?
That's a good question. We think that there is enough potential, especially in certain highly competitive neighborhoods, and then over time as EV adoption rates go up, to see around a 50% average utilization. And with that 50% average utilization, we're essentially paying off the cost of the initial installations after the first year or two.
Okay, that's good.
And then we're looking at 5-year terms to keep that charger in place. So that's the basic structure of the model. And there's operations and overhead that we have to cover and ongoing costs and things like that, but that's the basic idea.
Yeah.
So we touched on it, and we're getting dangerously close to the thorny issue of reliability and maintenance, which is the kind of Achilles heel of almost any level of charging really here. If you're operating as a CPO, Nathan, what kind of resources are you going to have in place over the course of that 5 years and beyond to maintain these units, keep them up and running? What kind of systems and workforce are you going to have to engage to make sure that they do meet the kind of reliability that people are going to expect?
Yeah, well, first of all, you have to start with the hardware itself. So we didn't, we didn't skimp on any of the materials here. These are that head piece that's on the charger is a cast stainless steel piece. The body itself is a brake metal stainless steel piece. We want these things to be very durable as we can make them, because we know that when you put something out in the public, it will have to withstand a certain amount of abuse, including from the weather and the sun. One thing I learned as an architect is you may think of the weather as the wind and the snow and the rain, but actually the UV rays from the sun really are the thing that can damage your building. And so having things like plastic parts and plastic components and vinyls and things like that, they're very susceptible to UV degradation. So nice, big, sturdy, resistant to road salt, stainless steel bodies. The detachable cable, is in terms of when something physically goes wrong with the charger, it's often that cord. And the cord doesn't just break because of vandalism in copper harvesting. People drop the cords themselves get run over. The receptacle, I go to public DC fast chargers all the time where you can see that the connector is starting to crack down the middle. That's all UV and weather strain and stress on that plastic piece. So again, for us not having to worry about replacing receptacles or replacing charging cords is a huge way to keep the maintenance costs down. It costs about $1,000 to repair an attached cord on an EV charger, because you're rolling a truck, you're sending an electrician out there to do it. So for us, we don't have to roll a truck when the cord gets damaged. We're just replacing that driver's cord. And then in terms of just other things, like trying to keep these things as simple as possible, we don't have display screen that you see in a lot of public chargers. Those things are very, curbside charging is never going to be under a canopy, right? We're not going to be able to put the chargers like under a gas station. We're starting to see some EV fast chargers where they've actually put a canopy. I'm always very happy when I can pull under a canopy, and those chargers will last a lot longer. But I think that first wave of unreliability that we had in this country was because they're just stuck these complicated pieces of electronics out in the middle of parking lots, and they just baked in the sun all day. And so of course your screens are going to start to fry. Of course your NFC readers are going to start to go on the fritz. And you have your gas driver saying, well, my gas pump never fails. Well, that's because somebody thought to protect them from the sun and the elements. If we did the same thing to the EV chargers, we wouldn't have as many reliability issues. But anyways, I digress. A source of frustration.
Well, as an EV preaching driver, to the choir here.
Put the things under a canopy. Anyways, but my company, I'm never going to have an EV charger under a canopy. They're always going to be out in the sun. So we want to take those things that can break. We don't have an NFC reader on there by default because we know it's going to be a source of failure. We don't want to have a cord attached to it not just because of the damage and vandalism issue, but because the body of the charger gets more complicated. That company that's operating in Melrose, I really like that product. It's a great way to keep the cord up and out of the way, but it is an extra component they have to build and pay for. As far as I know, it's been very reliable, but for us, we just worry about having different points of failure. And so we like the simplicity of this design. Then I'll just say as the last thing, we have a partnership with a company called Charger Help. They're based in Los Angeles, if you've heard of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so when our chargers go live, we have a contract that we will work with Charger Help, and they will become our reliability and uptime sort of specialist. So that allows us as a company, we don't have to spin up a fleet of vans and electricians going out and maintaining the chargers. It's more like we can outsource that.
So, you mentioned the NFC reader, and just to make sure that this is clear, because I'm not 100% clear yet either. So you don't have an app then to activate charging?
No, we do have an app.
Oh, you do have an app. So
yeah.
So is there a credit card reader of any sort built into the charging hardware, or is it solely the app you use to activate?
We can add a credit card charger to it if we need to.
Okay.
But otherwise, that little round hockey puck that you see with our logo on it, that's an RFID reader.
Oh, so it's solely RFID.
It's solely RFID.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
So NFC is just for the credit card. The RFID is for the charger itself.
Okay.
Is there any long-term potential to do just plug and charge? Is that going to be able to work with the cables that we're looking at here?
Absolutely. Yeah. Europe is already starting to go into ISO 15118. So we're going to start to see plug and charge in this country in the next few years.
Okay.
You all may know this, but the NEVI funding requirements stipulate that ISO 15111, I think it actually went into effect in February. So you won't get funding for your charger if you don't have that ISO 15118.
Okay, so that is applying all the way down to level 2 as well. They're not capping that at the... Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Excellent. Well, that's a big piece of it as we talk about, redundancy and just making it almost foolproof. That's the kind of experience that we're looking to get to. Obviously, you have to have these pieces in the meantime, and the RFID gives you a little more flexibility on if it's on private property or if you need to go with multiple users, then it gives an access point, a way to control that. But I think plug and charge is what we're looking to long term to make this as simple as possible for the end user.
Yep.
Let's see what else I have in the comments here. Walter wasn't able to make it, but he did manage to jump into the chat here, saying from the Network Architect channel, out of curiosity, do the EV/SE electronics reside in your post on the street or inside the meter? I've heard it's sometimes better to make the post just a receptacle and keep the rest inside. You're a behind the meter solution, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So we have some components inside and some components inside the building and some components inside the post itself. So the more sensitive things, the meter, some of the EV/SE communications is located in a box inside, next to the electrical panel. It can also be outside. It's in a weatherproof NEMA rated enclosure. But we do then have some things that are in the post itself.
Gotcha. Well, Bob is now happily on the wait list, so it's successfully got through to at least Cleveland, Ohio, and he has the infrastructure and folks in place there to help you get there when you need to.
We would love to come to Cleveland, Bob. So if you want to send me an email at nathan@itselectric.us and let me know who that city council member is, I would take that and I would introduce myself.
Excellent. And then we have Jed. In general, should we move to European style system of drivers providing their own charging cable for street charging? I mean, obviously we've kind of been through the European examples there, but
yeah,
it's worth revisiting. I mean, it's a system that is kind of taken for granted over there now, but it took me maybe when I did a Renault Zoe road trip around the UK in 2019, all of 5 minutes to appreciate it. It was very simple. The cord was right in the trunk there, and these posts are everywhere. You have to really actually know to look for them, because they, exactly as you say, the street furniture, they just look exactly like a regular piece of the sidewalk. But is that, Eric, what do you think? Is that something?
Well, I mean, we're already in adapter, limbo right now, right? Like, and that's why I look at these CCS1 to J3400 adapters, and I'm thinking, why do we need just the stubs? Why not use a cable, right? Everybody complaining about the short cables of the DC chargers. You should already have an extension cord anyway. So, I think it also, and you could maybe speak to this, Nathan. I think it also reduces a huge amount of cost on the charging provider's side, which then cascades down to less that you're paying for power, right? So every time someone cuts a cable on a charger and it costs that CPO $1,000 to replace it, well, you're paying for that overhead out of your pocket as an EV driver anyway. So why not make the whole process cheaper? So that's kind of my take on it too.
Yeah, and for us, we're going to have some additional logistic challenges as a bring your own cord purveyor in North America, where this doesn't really exist. And so we've got about 40 active drivers at the moment, and we have given them a cord. We just when the drivers encounter one of our chargers, there's a QR code on the charger that takes you to our app. Anybody can download our app. You'll see there's a button on it to request the cord. And once we get that request, we're able to get you a cord, within 24 hours, generally speaking. And we'll associate the cord with your license plate. So there's a way to make sure that we're not just giving cords to ICE vehicles or giving you, 20 cords. And then once you have that cord, you don't have to worry about it. You just kind of stow it in your trunk or your frunk, like you said before. We think that in markets where our chargers start to proliferate, we're going to start to work with the dealers to keep a cord in the car when they sell it, and that way we don't have to worry about doing it. So in the EU and the UK, when you buy a new EV, it comes with that cord.
Right.
That's just how it works there.
So I just had a crazy idea. Welcome package, a little baggie. It's got an It's Electric t-shirt. It's got your RFID card, instructions to set up the app, and the nice little cable. I like that.
I don't know if you saw that little image. We usually do the demo with one of these bags, but
I can pop it up quickly.
The little
there
bag this is the bag that you get.
A reusable tote. It's perfect.
A reusable tote, which you can store the cord in, or you can dump the cord out and use it for shopping.
Yeah, I love it.
So yeah, the little welcome package is something that, you'll have to be an It's Electric customer to find out what comes in our welcome package.
I should double check. I think I got on the wait list a while ago, but I will have to make sure, because otherwise I'm going to be back of the line. What else have we got here? So the only other piece I really wanted to touch on, I don't want to keep you too long, Nathan, because I know we're running up on time here, is where this kind of fits into the grand scheme of things. And you can talk, a little bit about the future of It's Electric, what you're trying to do in the next year, 3 years, etc. But in terms of EV adoption, which we know, is a little bit of a challenge at the moment, it's rising still. We're getting to a place where we're trying to get to that early majority and convince people in all situations, whether they have a driveway, don't have a driveway, have charging, won't have charging, to be able to get into an electric vehicle that they like and have a charging option, which obviously curbside charging and by extension a little further level 2 charging, destination charging, is a huge piece. Do you think, you can take this wherever you want, but to me it seems like the greatest potential to really stoke EV adoption and attract that next wave of users is the people who are in these cities where it's just really difficult. They're having to think about it, they're looking at chargers being either full or thinking about it as a kind of gas station mentality of having to go to a specific place to charge, and it kind of puts people off, and maybe they think, well, I'll come back in 3-5 years, see what the situation's like then. Is this potentially, these suburban curbside charging options, the greatest potential to really catalyze and kind of get to that next wave of adopters?
Well, yes. Yes. You don't have to take my word for it. There's a study by NREL that came out last year that said for the U.S. to meet our targets on EV adoption in this country, we need a total of 1 million level 2 chargers, public level 2. So those 1 million chargers are on top of I should finish the sentence. 1 million public level 2 chargers by 2030. So in less than 6 years, we've got to install. I think we have about 120,000. I haven't checked the update recently, but it's still under 150,000 total. So we've got to put in another 850,000 level 2 public chargers in 5.5 years. And that's a lot of work that we have to do. But you need to have that many charge points out to enable to overcome, I think, these sort of like this reluctance that I think we all are seeing with people switching from gas to electric. I've also seen estimates from outlets like Bloomberg that are like, actually, we need 2 million. It's a lot. We are at a moment right now that every level 2 charger that you put in is going to help the cause. But I really feel like we've gone through sort of maybe a first wave of just kind of finding level 2 chargers kind of popping up in random places, where we really need to focus on that utilization potential better. We need to put the charger where it may not be the most convenient place to put it in terms of how much it costs and the complexity around the permitting, but where we're going to see a high level of utilization. That's really the important thing. Those 1 million chargers just can't be sprinkled in, library parking lots that nobody will ever find. They have to be put out where it's easily accessible, where it's walkable to where people are living. Boston has a goal to put a level 2 charger within 5-minute walk from wherever you are. So that's the kind of saturation that we need. I think as it starts to proliferate, though, I think these first 100,000 chargers that we in a country have put in have been a big lift. But I think once we get to a certain point, people are going to start to realize the convenience of the value of owning an EV. I am very fortunate that there's a EV charger out here in the parking lot that I can use while I'm at work. I have to be really, really vigilant about it. And like sometimes I have to wake up a half hour early to get that charger. But I never go to a gas station. It's the best thing. And the only time I'm using a DC charger is when I'm, driving somewhere outside of New York City. I'm just like once a week, I'm just plugging in the car and that's it. I'm done. I don't have to think about it. I sometimes have to lose like 30 minutes of sleep, but I will trade that gladly of having to find a gas station in Brooklyn and, dealing with, filling up a smelly gas car. And, it's just a superior way to do it. It would be much better if I had a driveway and I can plug it in every day. But I think also having it on the block will kind of offer that sort of similar situation. And I think that's sort of like dawning realization about like EVs right now are seen as inconvenient because of the issues with reliability of public charging. But I think once we get past this first hurdle, once we have these well-positioned and reliable chargers, I'm totally convinced that everybody's going to start to say, wait a minute, actually, gas cars are less convenient. I never have to do a separate trip to go to a gas station. It's always the EV charger is going to be either where I live or where I'm going. And that's, I think, the promise of it. And I think that we can talk about it all day, but we have a lot of work to do to actually make that happen.
I think that does lead us in nicely to the close and the kind of future of itselectric. Obviously, you put up some big numbers there with what we need overall in level 2 charging. If I was to hold a charger to your head and ask you what you see being the position of the company in, say, end of 2025, start of 2026, what kind of goals do you have over the next 12 to 18 months?
I mean, we need to do this thing where we start with dozens, then hundreds, then thousands, then tens of thousands. And I'm a startup founder. I believe that we could just start to scrape the very top of the market potential and have tens of thousands of chargers in the ground. Like I think there is right now, even today, there is far more demand than anything that we could do. Before we sort of hit a wall of demand, like where we finally say, oh, there's not enough EVs on the road. Like right now today, we could put in tens of thousands of chargers and get great utilization from those chargers. That's just going to keep expanding. The problem around cities in particular is just going to continue to become more acute. And New York adopted California's goals for phasing out the sale of new internal combustion engine. So there's pressure coming from policy as well on this. So I would love to see us have really sort of active networks of hundreds of chargers in several different cities across the country in the next couple of years. And at the moment, there isn't really anything stopping us other than just sort of our ability and our bandwidth. We just need to get out there and start putting these in. We need to grow our team. We need to start to see that revenue coming in from drivers. All of these things are going to start to get tested out over the next 6 months.
Perfect. So we have to watch itselectric.us is the website. You can go there to, as Bob did in Cleveland, sign up for the waitlist and be early on the queue to look at getting one of these bring your own cable solutions. Anywhere else you'd like to call out, Nathan, places where people can go and take a look at the solution and what you've got going on?
We're very active on LinkedIn and Instagram. Those are our two social media channels that we use a lot. And so you can stay really up to date on those two channels. And like I said, some exciting announcements coming out of our feeds in the next month or so.
I know I'm watching because Boston is on your list, so it's right there for me. I'll put all the links to these the web properties, LinkedIn and Instagram, down below for people who are watching the replay. Eric, parting thoughts?
Yeah, no, I'm just excited to see how this plays out, because, like you said, I think there's a narrative right now that EVs aren't convenient and you can't really own them, and it's the chicken and egg problem. And if someone wants to put their foot forward first, they're going to basically, the problem is there to be solved by whoever wants to take the first step, is basically it. So I love the model. I love how you're implementing it. It's simple, it's easy. It's what they say about great innovation is something that when you see it, you look back and say, why weren't people doing this all the whole time, right? Like it shouldn't be like a surprise that it works. And I think this works. So good luck, Nathan. I'm looking forward to it.
Appreciate that. I really do. Yeah.
Yep. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you, Nathan, for taking time out of your evening on the East Coast here to run us down on the solution. And hopefully we'll be seeing these very, very soon on streets near us.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure. It's really great meeting you, and I enjoyed interacting with your listeners. So thanks so much.
Thanks for jumping into the comments.
Yeah.
Cheers, everybody.
Right.
Good night. We'll see you again soon.
Okay, bye.
Bye.